Okay, so Mushtaq, as you talk about the suite of classifications, even back in the 1970s, I don't think Carnegie ever thought they were coming up with a hierarchy of classifications, but it ended up becoming one just by natural, right? People wanted to become as a trustee once who recently told me, the public may not understand what an R1 institution is, but we all understand the number one, right? So people just started to create it as a hierarchy. So I'm just kind of curious about, I want to dig a little bit more in here about, what specifically around the evidence of how these classifications are used currently and why changing them might create some of the changes that you're describing. Because it seems to me that in the absence of, let me start that over again, that part over again. It seems to me that even if it's a suite of classifications, isn't it natural over time that you're going to have just a new hierarchy replace the other one that we used to have? Like, how do you manage that to make sure that doesn't happen again?
Yeah, Jeff, it's such an interesting point, and I've been reflecting on this a little bit that as all classification systems, I think over time end up becoming normative, whether they sort of intend to be or not. I was thinking about the animal kingdom, and somehow I think, it's not really the case that mammals are better in any sort of way than reptiles are, and yet we sort of have classified even the animal kingdom into different types of animals, some of which are we sort of prize in a different way than we do others. I think knowing that and knowing America's sort of thirst for rankings and for putting something on top of the other, I think that one of the things we wanted to do with this classification system is to be, if we were going to have a system be normative, we wanted it to be intentionally normative, right? And so we, I think, are really focused on trying to make sure that we are measuring the right things in this new student access and earnings classification, because we think that there will be sort of a normative aspect of that. And so, I think with the measuring of access and the measuring of earnings in sort of a clear way that has some good geographical sort of adjustments to it, I think we will, bring some order and sense to a little bit of a chaotic part of the which institutions are doing better than other institutions. I will say too, Jeff, just I think the mere fact of grouping a better grouping of like institutions will be really useful. Because I think part of what we have seen is that dollars are flowing to institutions in ways that are maybe not concomitant with what is actually going on down in the ground, and so if we can have a better set of like institutions, and whatever reason that some third party might want to use to be able to either fund institutions or group institutions to evaluate institutions, it'll just be done in a more intelligent way, and I think that's going to have some really good benefits down the road.
Okay, so I just want to put a little finer point on this if we can, because there has been this frenetic race among many institutions to become R1 institutions. Does that arms race end, do you think?
I think, as I think we changed the methodology on the R1, R2, and we created a new category of research colleges and universities. I think I'm really happy that we did that, because I think that there was a mythos that sort of grew out of what it meant to be an R1 institution, partially because the old calculation that divided up our R1s and R2s was so complicated, and measured so many things that I think it might have given the illusion that R1 institutions were in some sense better research institutions than our R2 institutions. Turns out that we weren't measuring better. We had 10 measures. They were mostly about volume. And I think one of the things that we have identified in this new methodology is just some simplicity. So an R1 now is just an institution that is granting a certain number of research doctorates and expending a certain amount of dollars. Our R2 institutions are just doing less of that. Doesn't mean that the R2s are worse in any way. And I think that maybe the clearness of the methodology will perhaps inspire some institutions not to have to try to chase the R1 thing. But even more importantly than that, Jeff, on the research side, This new category of research colleges and universities, I think, is incredibly important because it turns out there's a whole set of institutions, hundreds of institutions that have been doing research but aren't granting PhDs or not granting very many PhDs. And I think, those institutions were not considered research institutions for purposes of the Carnegie classification. So I think if you were president at one of those campuses and you wanted to be able to tell incoming students and tell the funding agencies, hey, we're a research institution for Carnegie purposes, what it meant was that you had to fit into a certain box of doing PhD production. I think this creation of this new category of research colleges and universities, or at least the new identification of these institutions, is really useful because I think it'll allow hundreds of institutions that are really focused on undergraduates and undergraduate research to be able to tell their story too, and to be able to lift some of those institutions up so that now when I'm some funding agency that's interested in funding some particular question, I now don't have to just look at the 146 R1s and the 133 R2s. I can know that there are 275 other institutions that are doing significant amounts of research too.